Print email Facebook Twitter More China warns all trade deals are void if US imposes tariffs. Other trade measures. China has warned the United States that any agreements reached on trade and business between the two countries will be void if Washington implements tariffs and other trade measures, as the two ended their latest round of talks in Beijing. The warning came after delegations led by U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross and China's top economic official Vice Premier Liu He wrapped up a meeting on Beijing's pledge to narrow its trade surplus. Mr. Ross said at the start of the event they had discussed specific American exports China might purchase, but the talks ended with no joint statement and neither side released details. The White House threw the meeting status into doubt on Tuesday, local time, by renewing a threat to impose 25% tariffs on $50 billion $66 billion of Chinese high-tech goods in response to complaints Beijing steals or pressures foreign companies to hand over technology. The event went ahead despite that, but Beijing said it reserved the right to retaliate. Tuesday's announcement revived fears the conflict between the two biggest economies might dampen global growth or encourage other governments to raise their own barriers to imports. The achievements reached by China and the United States should be based on the premise that the two sides should meet each other halfway and not fight a trade war, said the Chinese statement, carried by the officials in Hu news agency. If the United States introduces trade sanctions including raising tariffs, all the economic and trade achievements negotiated by the two parties will be void. The American embassy in Beijing did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Mr. Trump is pressing Beijing to narrow its politically volatile trade surplus with the United States, which reached a record $375.2 billion $495.7 billion last year. Tensions eased after China promised on May 19 to significantly increase purchases of farm goods, energy and other products and services following the last round of talks in Washington. U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said the dispute was on hold and the tariff hike would be postponed. Trade truce under threat after U.S. announcement that truce appeared to end with Tuesday's surprise announcement. It said the White House also would impose curbs on Chinese investment and purchases of U.S. high-tech goods and on visas for Chinese students. Analysts suggested Mr. Trump might be trying to appease critics of his administration's deal to allow Chinese telecom equipment giant ZTE Corp to stay in business. They said those political pressures meant the technology-related tariff hikes were likely to go ahead. Mr. Trump has threatened to raise tariffs on a total of up to $150 billion $198 billion of Chinese goods. Tuesday's announcement gave no indication whether the other increases might also go ahead. China has threatened to retaliate by raising import duties on a $50 billion $66 billion list of American goods including soybeans, small aircraft, whiskey, electric vehicles and orange juice. It criticized Tuesday's announcement but refrained from repeating its earlier threat. Beijing has resisted U.S. pressure to commit to a firm target of narrowing its annual surplus with the United States by $200 billion $264 billion. Private sector analysts say while Beijing is willing to compromise on its trade surplus, it will resist changes that might threaten plans to transform China into a global technology competitor. Mr. Ross was accompanied by agriculture, treasury and trade officials for the meeting at the Diaotai State Guest House, a leafy compound on Beijing's west side. Mr. Liu's delegation included China's central bank governor and commerce minister. Mr. Ross and Mr. Liu held a working dinner on Saturday ahead of their talks. Our meetings so far have been friendly and frank, and covered some useful topics about specific export items, Mr. Ross said at the opening of Sunday's meeting. The U.S. pressure over technology policy reflects growing American concern about China's status as a potential competitor and complaints Beijing improperly subsidizes its fledgling industries and shields them from competition. Foreign governments and businesses cite strategic plans such as Made in China 2025, which calls for state-led efforts to create Chinese industry leaders in areas from robots to electric cars to computer chips. AP/Reuters. Print email Facebook Twitter